Still joining us, and then we'll get started. Okay. All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone. My name is Ashley Rogers. I'm the executive director of the Whitney Plantation, who is sponsoring this event today. And we are a nonprofit museum in St. John the Baptist Parish with with a mission to educate the public about the history and legacies of slavery in the United States. And I am so thrilled about this talk today because I think that many people will agree that our modern day criminal justice system has a lot of legacies of slavery, and especially Angola, which we're going to talk about today. Our guests are the co-authors Calvin Duncan and Sophie Cull, who have written a book, The Jailhouse Lawyer, about the decades that Calvin spent wrongfully incarcerated at Louisiana State Penitentiary, the former Angola plantation that was once owned by Isaac Franklin, one of the largest and wealthiest slave traders in U.S. history. Prisoners today still cut cane and pick cotton in the fields of this former plantation. And during his years of incarceration, Calvin served as an inmate counsel substitute, working in the Angola prison law library, where he helped other prisoners with their legal claims. And this book, if you haven't read it yet, I tell everyone, you just come to the book club. You don't have to read the book, but afterwards, I'm going to pressure you. You do have to read the book. It is a great book, and we have it for sale in the Whitney Plantation online bookstore. If you don't have it already, it's also in the local libraries and on Libby. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests so we can jump into conversation. Calvin Duncan is an adjunct instructor at the Tulane School of Professional Advancement, where he teaches criminal law. He's the director of the Light of Justice program, a program assisting incarcerated individuals to overcome procedural barriers in accessing the court at the post-conviction relief stage of the criminal legal system. Charged with a capital crime he did not commit at 19, he was sentenced to life in prison, and at Angola, he became a jailhouse lawyer assisting other prisoners to seek justice from unlawful convictions, including those sentenced to Louisiana's death row. Since being released and exonerated, Duncan worked with the litigation team that led the United States Supreme Court to rule that Louisiana's non-unanimous jury verdict law was unconstitutional. He holds a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School, and he is our recently elected Clerk of Court in Orleans Parish. We're very proud of him for that. So congratulations. Sophie Cull is a criminal justice reform advocate whose work focuses on excessive sentencing and harsh punishments. She has led public education campaigns on racial discrimination in the legal criminal system and has published on the death penalty, life sentences, and prosecutorial misconduct. As part of the founding team of the Visiting Room Project, she helped create the world's largest collection of filmed interviews with people serving life without parole. She began her career in New Orleans assisting legal organizations defending individuals on Louisiana's death row. A couple of powerhouses here, so thank you so much for joining us. And first, I want to congratulate you both on this remarkable piece of writing. It was beautiful, it was engaging. I felt like it should be a movie. That's one woman's opinion. It was so good. And so I want to just jump right into it because one of the things that I'm very curious about, and I'm sure everyone who's read the book will be curious about, is how did the partnership between the two of you take shape and form into this incredible book?
Sophie.
I'm going to start. Thank you so much for having us, Ashley. It's a real honor to be here, knowing the incredible work and legacy of the Whitney. So very excited to be with you all. Calvin and I met about a week after he came home from Angola prison. Calvin was really well known in the criminal defense community in Louisiana because he had assisted so many people's clients from inside of prison and was an expert in post-conviction law. And so when he came home, there were a number of organizations that were vying to convince him to work with them. And mine was lucky enough to win the day. So Calvin came to work at the Capital Appeals Project, I think in part to continue the work he'd been doing on behalf of people on death row on the inside, which Calvin can speak more to that later. But he took up an office across the hall, and we just started taking daily walks for coffee. And, it was like a very formative time in very different ways for the two of us. I was still pretty new to Louisiana and to criminal defense work. having moved from Australia, and Calvin, was re-entering life at home after 28 and a half years in prison. So Calvin, for instance, taught me how to get my first credit card because he figured out how to get his first credit card because neither of us had any credit history. I would like sort of help Calvin navigate the computer and Excel spreadsheets and, huge list of options at the coffee shop. And so we just sort of like fell into a really nice rhythm and a friendship. And then we came to work together on a campaign in Shreveport to try to remove the Confederate flag that was flying on the courthouse lawn, in front of a courthouse that was sentencing more young Black men to death than nearly any other city in the country for its size. And we ended up taking these long drives to Shreveport pretty regularly that were about 6 hours each way. And Calvin just told me his story on those car rides. And it was quite a few years later that we decided to try to work on a book. But I think it was that time spent together, and that really precious time for me to learn about Calvin's journey that set that in motion. And I think it was in some ways helpful that I hadn't worked on Calvin's case or didn't know Calvin when he was incarcerated, because I was sort of a blank canvas and Calvin could tell me his story from beginning to end, how he wanted to tell it and in the ways that made sense to him. And I think the book is really an effort to just do that, to tell his story his way. So.
Yeah, during those long trips to Shreveport, yeah, I needed somebody to talk to, and Sophie was there because I had to talk about the things I experienced in prison, because that's all I could talk about. I used to try to go on dates and stuff, but that wasn't working. Well, you just talk about the prison. You can't talk about anything else. I said, no, that's all I know. And so yeah, Sophie was very, very instrumental in helping me really just being that person I can actually trust to talk about what I experienced and the people that I was trying to help in prison.
Mm. And I am instructed to remind everyone we are recording this, so we're going to make this available later on. And also, we have a Q&A at the end of this session today. We're going to have a Q&A. So if you have questions that come up throughout our conversation, you can put those in the Q&A, and we will field those at the end of the session. So I wanted to, this is such a personal book, obviously. I was really struck by how you were able to recreate these kinds of moments that happened so long ago and the feelings that came up, that was very present. And I think, it's one thing to kind of be talking about your past, but the way that you have to do that when you're constructing a narrative this way is so much deeper and more intimate. And I was wondering for you, Calvin, what did it feel like to revisit your history in that way so that you could communicate it to a broad audience? Was there any type of, I guess, catharsis in sort of going through that process?
Well, it wasn't difficult because it wasn't done all at one time. It was done over a period of time.
Mm.
So on our long trips, me talking about what happened in prison and how I got to prison, my childhood, it was more therapeutic than anything for me because I needed somebody to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And God blessed me to put Sophie in my life that I trust. And then when we got we had the thought that we should do a book. Um, yeah, and it was important to me is to express like when I got denied how I felt, and as opposed to because I read a lot of books and I read a lot of literature and you don't hear the emotional part,
Mm-hmm.
and so I never wanted people to think that I was in prison. I didn't have any emotion. I didn't feel anything when the judge denied me. I didn't want people to come away from that. I wanted the people to really fully understand what we feel when the system really fails us. And yeah, so I think we didn't. I think what was important that we didn't try to do it all in one setting. It was over a period of time.
It's clear that, and that emotion comes through very clearly. I feel like, reading it, you really empathize, and can, understand how you might be feeling. And I was wondering too, it's clear that you have trial transcripts that you're able to rely on in some cases. But did you also have, notes or diaries from those times that you were able to draw back on to remember some of these things, or is this just burned into your memory?
It's burned in my memory because
Yeah.
that's all I had. I was young and I'm trying to navigate the criminal legal system. I'm trying to help myself. I'm trying to help others. And in prison, you don't have much to think about. And so those were my informative years. And and I had nothing else to think about. That's, like,
Yeah.
it wasn't like if I was on the outside experiencing trying to pay rent, trying to experience going to college, experiencing paying a mortgage, getting fired, and things like that. It's just in prison. That's so it wasn't a lot. It just was an ongoing process. Me trying to navigate the criminal legal system, trying to help other people do the same.
I'll just say, as someone who was on the receiving end, Calvin's memory is extraordinary. I think one of the reasons, people feel or have said that the dialogue in the book feels so true to life is Calvin really gave it to me word for word in most of those instances. There's key conversations that were important to him with clients or with mentors. He's reciting that word for word.
It's incredible. You really feel so inside of it. So, and Sophie, I'm curious, as you were working on this and you were already working in this kind of space, but how did working on this book with Calvin, in what ways did that change your perspective on the legal system and the work you do?
Yeah, it changed a lot. I have been visiting people who are serving life sentences since my first month in the States, 17 years ago. And I thought that I had an appreciation of not just what they were up against, but their perspective on what they were facing and how they were handling it and what they needed from their legal team to do that. But speaking to Calvin, I just realized how little I knew and how little I could really ever fully understand what it's like to sit in that chair on the other side of the visiting room. But I think I can say that something that I think I would do differently or think about differently from what Calvin's taught me and from his story is just, I think we're quick to assume that people, if we're on somebody's side or say we're working on somebody's behalf of somebody else, that they'll like immediately understand and trust us from that point onward. And Calvin's helped me understand all the very small but important ways that people on the inside are looking to know that you're really fighting for them and that you really are their advocate. And it just opened my eyes to ways we need to be really important to tend to those things and not rush past them because we think that by offering help, we don't have to sort of tend to or justify that ongoing relationship, if that makes sense.
That's a really interesting perspective. That's actually something that does come through in the book as well. And you can see the kind of broken promises that happen or the ways that people on the outside can kind of disappoint when you're seeking help and assistance. And there's so many things you can't do because you need that outside help, but they're not always present with you. One of the things, Calvin, I wanted to ask you about, like one of the big themes that I noticed in this book was about the deep bonds between people, between the men who were incarcerated in Angola. And there's a lot of different people that you talk about in the book that you form these kind of familial bonds with. And I'm curious if you can kind of reflect on the importance of those friendships for yourself and for the people who are released like yourself, how are you able to kind of maintain that type of connection with people?
Yeah, so where for all of us, we was condemned. Society